Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining here. We'll give folks a minute before we get started. Thirty seconds, and then we can kick things off. Alrighty, so I say we go ahead and get started. So thank you everyone for joining. I'm Carla. I'm one of the MBA investment banking and management consulting coaches on Leland. And I know folks always have questions about the MBA waitlist. So love hosting this session. I think the key takeaway I always want people to know is there's still a chance, right? There's still a chance. So do not lose faith. And there's tons you can do while on the wait list to kind of better your admissions chances. So with that, I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen and we can go ahead and get started. I put together a deck. I know this session is scheduled for an hour, but we can kind of play it by ear. I honestly, it'll probably be closer to 30 to 40 minutes. So happy to do a little bit of Q&A. So uh, just a brief agenda here. I'll do a quick welcome, overview of the MBA waitlist, looking at your application materials. I'll also be talking about a letter of continued interest, thinking about obtaining additional endorsements, staying engaged with the programs, and then next steps. So a little bit about me, as I mentioned, I am an MBA coach at Leland. I got my MBA at Chicago Booth. I got my MPP at the Harvard Kennedy School. So I'm familiar with both MBA and MPP admissions. When I applied, I was admitted to the top MBA programs, which was really wonderful, and secured a good bit in scholarship funding. I would say I have been doing admissions consulting for informally about 7 years now, but formally more around 5. So I served on the Harvard Kennedy School, had an admissions committee revamp. I helped to streamline that process, and I also consult with Ivy Advisors, which is a boutique client advisory firm. I've helped all kinds of candidates get into school, but here I just, what's it called? Just wanted to call out one fun example. So helped someone with 3.2 GPA, 145 quant, 158 verbal get admission to a top 5 MBA program with 60% funding. That was, a huge win for me. But yeah, throughout this process, just really enjoy getting to know people and getting to tell their stories. Uh, yeah, so in the chat, if you kind of want to drop in, where you're dialing in from and any specific areas that you hope to cover, can definitely be flexible with the presentation and ensure that we get to those. Okay, so just a little bit about the wait list. So the thing to know about MBA waitlists is they vary in nature. They are not uniform. And acceptance rates off the wait list really are quite variable. So, for example, in 2021, Wharton accepted just about 3% of waitlisted applicants, whereas Kellogg accepted around 35%. So, even amongst the top schools, there's a huge delta, right? Um, this data is really hard to come across, but just from what's been released in prior years, it seems like around 30% of waitlisted MBA applicants receive an offer of admissions. Unfortunately, for people on the wait list, other than getting, a prompt saying, "Hey, do you want to be put on the wait list?" Most waitlisted candidates don't receive any feedback or guidance from admissions, so that's why we're here to demystify the process. Round one of this year, most people are aware by now that this admission cycle for MBA is shaping up to be one of the largest pools in recent memory in like the last decade. So, we are seeing a ton of waitlisted candidates this year. And I think what's interesting is even last year, even in the 2023 cycle before this huge spike in applications, we also saw this trend. So it seems that waitlist, continue to grow. And I do want to reiterate that during the waitlist process, speed really, really does matter. And I'll touch on that in a second. Okay. So we're going to do a few exercises looking at some components of the what's it called? Of the MBA application process. Um, I'm sure you're quite familiar with the top half, which is the criteria that admissions committees use when assessing a candidate. And then what I've done here to kind of, illuminate the process, the waitlist process a little bit is kind of give some workarounds around ways that you can demonstrate and plug any holes in your application that there might be. So let's just start off with each of these columns. So as y'all know, academics are important, not just your undergrad GPA, but also your GMAT or GRE scores. There are more and more schools that are offering waivers, but that's still not super common just yet. So test scores still matter as well as any academic awards. When people talk to me and they're like, shoot, like I took advanced calculus or something in undergrad, and that like really tanked my GPA for a semester in school, or it's like a glaring issue on my transcript. I always suggest a few workarounds. So some action items that you might consider is submitting updated test scores. I know for most people, standardized testing isn't how they want to spend their free time, but if you really feel like, hey, I only studied for like 3 weeks and I feel like I could have done a better job reviewing and I just ran out of time. That might be something that you look into, and the process there is to notify the admissions committee if you do get a better score, like, hey, listen, I've continued keeping my head down. I really want to come here, and here is my score. You might also consider taking a class at a select institution. There are so many extension schools now, or so many different boot camp offerings of sorts. So looking into that. And then academic endorsements, right? If you have a professor, or if you have someone who is really renowned in a field who might be able to attest for you, that might be helpful. And I'll get to exactly how to do that in a second. In terms of career, obviously they look at the depth and breadth of your professional experience, any promotions you've had, and then the maturity of your post MBA goals. MBA programs really care about how their alumni do after graduation. So when you submitted your application, like, did you have a good idea of what you wanted to do in the short and long term? So, a few things, a few welcomed updates for the admissions committee might be any promotions that you've had or any assignment updates. So, for example, if you get promoted or if you get put on, a more visible project or engagement, that might be a really good way to show like, hey, I'm still making really good career progress. And then if you feel, for example, that you didn't take adequate time to kind of talk about your post MBA goals, perhaps during the waitlist process, this is an opportunity. This might be an area for you to expand on a little more. Leadership and diversity. So looking at leadership qualities, looking at the unique networks that you might bring to that school, and looking at your background and perspectives. So for example, everyone has a very different kind of a very different approach to how much they want to disclose about themselves throughout a process, especially, the MBA process. But if you think like, oh shoot, like there was like a dip in my performance during COVID because, we were in a global pandemic and I didn't really want to talk about that during my original application, but it's really an integral part of explaining something that happened, then perhaps that's something that you might want to touch on. Or, just added information about who you are that perhaps you did not include during the first go around. And then the last, what's it called? The last area that isn't spoken about explicitly, but honestly, that I think trumps everything else is yield. It's, does the admissions committee believe that you will come if they let you off the wait list? Admissions committees care a lot about their rankings, a lot about the school statistics, and yield is one of the most important, statistics that the admissions committee is charged with. And so, have you shown up to school? Have you engaged with students? Have you engaged with admissions committee members? Have you talked to alumni? Do you have alumni who are calling the school saying, hey, like this person really, really wants to come here and will absolutely come, even if that means like you give them a call the day classes start, they will make it happen. So yield is really, really important as well. Okay, so alrighty, so we're now going to take a few minutes to brainstorm some ideas for a letter of continued interest. Sorry, let me go back to that. And letters of continued interest, every school does them differently. So for example, some schools will give you like a form that says, hey, every 3 months you can submit 250 words in updates, or other schools may not give you any direction at all, which might actually be a very flexible invitation to just send them what you would like. And so the point of a letter of continued interest in whatever form it takes is to just keep up with the committee and say, hey, make a case for yourself, make a case for why you're interested, make a case for your candidacy. And so, what we'll do here is I will pause for 2 or 3 minutes to look back at that rubric that I just flashed on the screen previously. So you can start to think about like, hey, what are the different elements of my candidacy that that I might want to write about. And while y'all do this, I will look in the chat and touch on any relevant questions thus far. So let's take 2 or 3 minutes to think about looking at these different dimensions. What are updates you might be able to provide? Okay. So a bunch of people direct messaged me. I tried to get through as many of the questions as possible and will continue to look at them as we go throughout. So hang tight there. Okay, so now let's move on to the next portion. Okay, which is obtaining additional endorsements or recommendations. So obviously, everyone had to submit recommendations as part of their original package. But sometimes it is helpful to gain additional endorsements from alum or from people who are, who are explicitly connected to the program. I will say sometimes I get questions like, my contact is like an outstanding Harvard alum. Can they write in for, for Penn? And sure, but it really doesn't carry the same currency. I would say you really have to focus on alum of that specific program. Um, and there are a few ways to go about this. I have known people, for example, like really happenstance. I knew someone who got an endorsement from Henry Kravis at KKR, not because they were like family friends or anything, but because this individual was a program manager at a nonprofit that he's like very involved in. And like he heard she was on a wait list somewhere and she made the case to him for a few minutes and he managed to get off the wait list. So maybe Henry helped. If the Henry Kravises of the world are not in your networks, worry not, because there's still, a lot of different ways that you can go about this. So obviously you can reach out to folks who you might have, warm connections to, who other individuals in your network might be able to introduce you to. Or to be honest, sometimes you just have to get really, really scrappy. Like I've worked with people who have just like cold called, cold outreached alum of programs where like they just didn't have any connections. And I remember hearing about like there was this one candidate who managed to get on the phone with like a very senior executive, and this individual was like, okay, I'm on the treadmill. You have like 30 seconds to tell me why you want to go to this school, right? And it worked out really well for them. They got in off the wait list and this person endorsed them. So for this next exercise, and I'll give it another minute or two here while I respond in the chat, is just giving you a few minutes to brainstorm. Okay, if it's not people in my network, how might I be able to, to reach out to folks to make a case for my candidacy? And I will say that before we go to the reflection, MBA programs have alum boards, right? People who have opted in to be really involved. So that's a really good place to look. Or people who are involved in like different practitioner initiatives, people who might guest lecture at the school. So those are just some areas to think about. So I will give you all a few minutes while I respond to questions in the chat, and then we can reconvene. Okay, we're gonna reconvene here. Sorry, I'm like furiously trying to get through as many of the questions that I've gotten. All right, let's continue moving on. Okay, and then staying engaged with the program. So as I mentioned, admissions committees won't say this, but yield is the most important part of staying of the MBA process for not the most important, it's one of the most important metrics that the admissions committee kind of grades itself against. And part of showing your interest in attending the program is staying engaged with it. So we'll give you a couple of minutes to brainstorm different ways to stay involved with the program, whether it's visiting campus, which I know is not feasible for students for a number or for candidates for a number of reasons, but if possible, showing up on campus makes a really big difference if you haven't already. It's talking to admissions committee members, seeing if they'll take a call with you, um, you know, writing a letter, whatever, going to a webinar because, you haven't gone to a school specific event. So just thinking of, within the tool set available to you, like what might you be able to do to improve your chances. And so we'll give you here 2 minutes to kind of brainstorm some of these different ways to stay engaged. And we'll continue answering questions in the chat. Okay. I'm gonna pause here and keep moving. By the way, I'm sorry, some people are writing like literal paragraphs in the chat. Cannot read them live time. Uh, yeah. Uh, just if you could just keep your questions generic and brief so that everyone can benefit from them in the chat, that would be great. Okay. So, in terms of next steps, spend 2 to 3 minutes kind of putting together your finalized checklist. I think, honestly, this is kind of the end of the presentation, but you know, think about, okay, when looking at my academic profile, my career profile, leadership and diversity, and then also yield considerations, what are some ways that I might be able to make the case for myself. Sorry, I'm talking on mute. Let's wrap up the session here. And then um what's it called? I'm happy to take one or two lifetime questions. And then yeah, if you have any additional questions, you can feel free to reach out one-on-one. So this is just a coach credit giveaway discount for 15% and the access code for it. So it's my first name dash my very long combined last names dash 15 off in the event that you're interested. Yeah, and thank you all for joining today. And like I said, best of luck. Do not lose faith. And there's still tons you can do on the wait list. So if people want to raise their hands, I can take one or two questions here before we wrap up. Okay. I see Kushagara.
Okay, thank you, Carla, for hosting this. First of all, I'll just super quickly ask my question. When is the good time to start sending updates, especially given that now the holidays will come up?
Yeah, so like I said, speed matters. So holidays people will be taking off, but it certainly doesn't hurt to move with speed, just in that you're working with limited chances to be admitted. There's limited slots. So I would say the sooner the better. Um, okay, Angela?
Yeah, thank you so much. So I wanted to ask, how often can I like send updates to them? Because of course I do not want to bombard them with a lot of updates so they don't get overwhelmed, right? So like how frequent can I send them updates about my progress, basically. Thank you.
Yeah, I would say there isn't, some schools have like a set cadence. Sometimes they don't provide specific parameters, but I would say like I wouldn't reach out to them with fluff, right? I would only reach out to them if you have a thoughtful update to provide, whether it's, whether it's saying like, hey, I got promoted, or hey, I was able to visit campus and here's what I've learned. I would keep it to really thoughtful, substantial updates because everyone's busy and you want to make your interactions count. Alrighty. Well, thank you everyone and best of luck with the process.
Carla, can I ask one last question before we go?
Sure.
If a school explicitly discourages letters of support, is it still appropriate to send those or no?
Which school is it?
I have a webinar tomorrow with the school, but I was talking to somebody who attended the same waitlist webinar last year, and they said it specifically mentioned HBS, to be precise.
Okay. I would follow whatever procedures it is that,
Okay.
so if they say no letter, no letter, but there are other avenues.
Okay. Thank
Yep.
you.
Okay. Alrighty. Thank you, everyone. Take care.